Namaskar, this is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. It's Monday, October the 2nd, a national holiday in India as we celebrate the birth anniversary of two leaders, Mahatma Gandhi, the father of the nation, and Lal Bahadur Shastri, Gandhi's disciple and India's second Prime Minister. We wonder what they would make of today's India. It has its challenges, it also has its success. Like the economy. India is the world's fastest growing major economy. It has been beating the global trend, but a poor monsoon may slow India down a bit. The world's biggest economies, the US and China, are under pressure. We look at the numbers tonight. Meanwhile, Turkey has bombed Iraq as the Kurdish threat re-emerges. The Maldives is set to get a new president and it's a setback for India. We'll tell you why. The Afghan embassy in New Delhi has been shut down after months of power struggle. We'll bring you the full story. Elon Musk has slammed Justin Trudeau for crushing free speech, the same Trudeau who justifies Khalistani terror as freedom of expression. And experts warn that the next pandemic will be 20 times bigger than the last one. It will take 50 million lives and it's coming. The headlines first. Algeria says Niger's junta has accepted a 6-month transition plan. The coup leaders have also agreed to mediation by Algeria. The junta has ruled the West African nation for over 2 months now. Algeria, which borders Niger, had first proposed the idea in late August. Serbia claims the number of troops on Kosovo border is back to normal. Last week's deadly clash in Kosovo was one of the gravest escalations in years. Serbia had deployed tanks and artillery. Washington urged them to pull the military deployment. Meanwhile, NATO will deploy 600 British soldiers to Kosovo to boost its presence there. Armenia accuses Azerbaijan of opening fire in a border region in the east. This follows Baku's lightning offensive in Nagorno-Karabakh last month. Armenia says it has suffered casualties. Baku rejects the claims. The US and the Philippines begin annual drills in the disputed South China Sea days after a diplomatic row between Manila and Beijing. China had deployed patrol boats in the South China Sea. Last week, the Philippines removed a Chinese floating barrier in a special operation. The Nobel Prize for Medicine goes to mRNA COVID vaccine researchers. Katalin Kariko and Drew Weissman paved the way for the COVID-19 vaccines. With this honor, the Nobel Committee broke its practice of only awarding decades-old research. And India mulls barring pilots and flight attendants from using perfume. The aviation regulator is updating rules regarding alcohol consumption. The new proposal says crew members cannot use mouthwash, tooth gel or perfumes. Using these could result in a positive breath analyzer test. Tonight we begin with the global economy. It is under stress again. It began with China. Their economy is weakening and it's pulling down global growth. There are signs of a downturn from the US to Asia and even in India. Everyone is feeling the pressure. Their challenges are common, though the degree may vary. There's sluggish growth, high inflation and rising debt levels. Tonight we get you an assessment on where things stand and where they're heading. Let's start with China. A new forecast is out. It is from the World Bank. It says that China's growth projection for 2024 will be cut. The earlier projection was 4.8%. The new number is 4.4%, so a reduction of 0.4. It may seem small, but it has set the alarm bells ringing in Beijing. A growth rate of 4.4% is an indictment, especially if you look at China's record. Before the pandemic, their growth rate was between 6 and 7%. This was in the late 2010s. Then came the Wuhan virus. It dealt a serious blow to China. In 2020, the growth rate plummeted to 2.2%. The next year, they saw a rebound. 2021 saw China grow at 8.4%. But this was mainly due to the opening up. The restrictions had been relaxed, people were going back to work, and it reflected in the growth numbers. But this was temporary. The next year, that's 2022, China's growth slowed to 3%. What about this year? China is expected to grow at 5.1% this year. That's the World Bank's projection. So 5.1% now and 4.4% the next year. What do these numbers tell you? That China has not made any recovery after the pandemic. In other words, the world's second biggest economy is falling behind. And what is dragging China down? It's debt. Their regional banks are struggling. They're out of cash. Many local banks in China are almost broke. And when I say many, I mean more than 300. More than 300 banks are in trouble. Experts say these are quote-unquote high-risk banks. They face a serious liquidity crunch, and they're being bailed out by the government. Local governments in China are infusing cash, and they're doing this by borrowing more money. So banks are being recapitalized with loans. And for this, local governments have borrowed $21 billion so far. $21 billion. These loans were taken out this year. The money was then used to replenish banks. And this has become a dangerous, vicious cycle. Poor investments turn sour. Chinese institutions run out of cash. The government steps in. It takes out more loans, and the cycle goes on. China's local governments are heavily indebted. If you watch the show regularly, you already know this. They owe more than $12 trillion. That's the debt, $12 trillion. That's 76% of China's economic output. And China is still adding more debt to this pile. This is unsustainable. These growing debt levels are a big worry, not just in China, but in the rest of the world too, rest of Asia as well. In countries like Malaysia and Thailand, household debt is rising. In Vietnam, corporates are taking more loans. And the World Bank is concerned. It says these high debt levels could impact growth. It has spelled out other risks as well, like weak demand, sluggish trade, high interest rates. All this can impact the global economic outlook. And no one is immune to such challenges, not even the United States of America, the world's biggest economy. It is still trying to avoid a recession. A government shutdown has been averted, but that's just a stopgap arrangement. The deal is temporary. The US government has been funded only till the 17th of November. So the squabbling over the budget may resume within weeks. Inflation, too, seems a concern.
Inflation has moderated somewhat since the middle of last year, and longer-term inflation expectations appear to remain well anchored. Nevertheless, the process of getting inflation sustainably down to 2% has a long way to go.
2%. That's America's inflation target. In August, it was almost 4%, so double their target. There is still work to be done. The US economy faces challenges like the ongoing strike of auto workers, the resumption of student debt payments, and the risk of another government shutdown. All these problems could trigger a recession in America. So the top two economies of the world are facing problems, the US and China. How is India faring? So far, the Indian economy has been bucking the trend. India remains the fastest growing major economy in the world, and it is not expected to lose this tag anytime soon. However, some weaknesses have started showing. We are in the month of October now. The next 6 months will be critical. Some experts fear a slowdown in India too. This is on a quarterly basis. In the last quarter, India grew at over 7%. But the months ahead could be tough. Between October and December, India's growth could drop to 6%, followed by another fall of 0.5%. In the final quarter, India could report a growth rate of around 5.5%. That's the projection. And what is slowing India down? Agriculture is a major reason. The monsoon season has not gone well. Rainfall has been below expectation. India has reported its weakest monsoon in 5 years, and this will impact output. Supplies of key commodities could be constrained. Food items like rice, sugar, and wheat will be affected. Food prices might go up. It's economics 101. When supplies take a hit, prices go up. And India has been preparing for this scenario. New Delhi has tried to calibrate supplies. In the past few months, we've seen this. Food exports have been restricted in India. The export of wheat, rice, and sugar has been limited. These restrictions could stay for a longer period of time. So when you connect the dots, this is what you see. A challenging global environment where the key will be policy interventions. How governments negotiate these challenges will determine the outcome. Recession, slowdown, or a hard landing. Turkey has bombed Iraq. It's a new flashpoint in an old conflict. Late on Sunday, Turkish warplanes entered northern Iraq. Their target? Kurdish militants. Around 20 sites were bombed by Turkey. 20 sites in Iraq, including caves, shelters, and depots. Ankara has not confirmed the number of kills, but their statement says many militants were neutralized. So why did Turkey carry out this operation? an airstrike in another country, because this was a retaliation. Yesterday morning, Sunday morning, Kurdish militants carried out a suicide attack. Their target was Turkey's Interior Ministry, a very secure building in Ankara. From what we know, there were two attackers. They drove up to the building in a stolen car. This was around 9:30 a.m. local time. The first attacker tried to breach the building. He was immediately shot dead. The second had a bomb strapped onto him. He opened fire at the security officials before setting it off. The whole thing was captured on camera. Take a look at this. Two security officials were injured, but no deaths from the bombing. The only victim was the owner of the vehicle. The attackers killed him before stealing it. Now, the timing is key here. Turkey's parliament was reconvening on Sunday. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan was supposed to address lawmakers. Sunday is a working day there. The address did go ahead, but the focus was mostly on the bombing. It was all part of the attackers' plan. But who were they? The PKK has claimed responsibility for this bombing. Who are the PKK? The Kurdistan Workers' Party. It was founded in the late 1970s. Its mission is to create a separate country called Kurdistan. Now, some context here. The Kurds are an ethnic group in West Asia, like the Arabs and the Persians. But unlike the Arabs and the Persians, the Kurds do not have a country to themselves. They're spread across multiple states. Kurds live in Syria, Iraq, Turkey, and Iran. In the late 1970s, Kurds in Turkey began to agitate. They demanded a separate country. Ankara, of course, rejected this. So by the 1980s, their methods changed. The PKK became more radical and violent. They found a safe haven in northern Iraq. Now, this region was controlled by Iraq's own Kurdistan Workers' Party. That's how the PKK came to northern Iraq. And from there, they launched attacks, suicide bombings, ambushes, kidnappings. It's been a long and bloody conflict. Some 40,000 people have been killed so far. Turkey considers the PKK to be a terrorist organization. So does the US and the European Union. In the 80s and 90s, the PKK was a major threat. But now their influence has waned. Erdogan called Sunday's attack the final flutters of terrorism. Listen to this.
We will continue our struggle with determination until the last terrorist is eliminated domestically and abroad. We will not allow the terrorist organization to direct politics and prevent our country's blessed march. The attack this morning, where two villains were neutralized as a result of the timely intervention of our security units, is the final flutters of terrorism.
Final flutter or not, Turkey has responded with force, like they have before. Ankara has carried out such operations in the past as well, sometimes against Kurds in Syria, sometimes in Iraq. There was an operation in August as well. Turkish drones hit Kurdish targets in northern Iraq. Around 7 militants were killed. Now, there's a key difference to note here. Technically, the Kurds in Syria and Iraq are linked to each other. But in Syria, the West supports them. The group in Syria is called YPG, the People's Defense Units. Now, why does the West support them? Because the YPG is fighting Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. I know it's a bit complicated, but the bottom line is this. Erdogan considers all Kurds to be his enemies. The West considers only some of them as terrorists. So Sunday's attack is ammunition for Erdogan. How? Well, he can think of three ways. Number one, to crack down on Kurdish political parties, which is already happening, by the way. Around 20 people have been arrested in Turkey. One is a Kurdish provincial spokesman. The other is a local party chief. They have been accused of funding the PKK. Number two, to justify Erdogan's planned operation in Syria. He's been talking about it for a while. He's talked about creating a security corridor. It would be 30 kilometers wide. It would also keep the Kurdish militants at bay. At least that's his assumption. But to do that, he needs to launch an operation inside Syria. He needs to drive Kurdish militants away from the border. The West has rejected Erdogan's plan. But on Sunday after the attack, he repeated it. Erdogan promised to push ahead with a corridor. And finally, number three, as more leverage against NATO, Erdogan is holding up Sweden's entry into the alliance, into NATO. Their disagreement is again over Kurds. Sweden has granted asylum to many of these Kurds. Erdogan says extradite them. And Sunday's attack supports his position more than Sweden's. After all, the capital of Turkey was targeted. The last time Ankara was attacked was in 2016. There were 5 attacks in a single year. So this latest bombing comes after a period of 8 years. Hence the quick response. There is no doubt that Kurdish terrorism has bled Turkey. It has killed innocent civilians and Turkish security personnel. Erdogan may have inflated the threat, but the point is, it is a real threat. It could lead to a widespread crackdown on Kurdish people, both inside and outside Turkey. Closer home, there is some bad news for India. The Maldives has elected a new president, Mohammad Muizzu. He defeated the sitting president, Ibrahim Soli. But why is that bad news for India? Because Muizzu was a pro-China candidate and now he's a pro-China president-elect. The results were announced this weekend. It is the second round between Soli and Muizzu. The first round was on the 9th of September, last month. Neither candidate crossed 50%. But this time, Muizzu did. He got 54% of the vote. The incumbent Soli got 46% votes. As the result came in, Prime Minister Narendra Modi congratulated Muizzu, one of the first leaders to do so, and this is what he said. Let me quote. India remains committed to strengthening the time-tested India-Maldives bilateral relationship and enhancing our overall cooperation in the Indian Ocean region. Let me tell you why the Maldives is important. It is an archipelago in the Indian Ocean, meaning it's a chain of islands. And the Indian Ocean is the nerve center of global trade. Around 80% of oil is shipped via this ocean. The Maldives is like a toll gate on this route. Historically, it's been part of India's sphere of influence, but now China wants it. Beijing has been trying to reduce Indian influence in the Indian Ocean. They already have key assets in Sri Lanka. The Maldives could be next. India and President Soli together kept China at bay. But will the new president do the same? And here's why I ask. Muizzu belongs to the PPM, the Progressive Party of Maldives. His mentor is former President Abdullah Yameen. Yameen was supposed to run for president this time, but he was disqualified. He was convicted and jailed for corruption. And that's how Muizzu got the job. Now, the PPM is not just pro-China. Their party, it's not just pro-China, it's also anti-India. It's the same party that came up with the India Out campaign. That's what their campaign was called, India Out. It seeks to end Indian influence in the Maldives. President Soli was the opposite. He openly declared that his policy was India first. So you have two very different positions. One was India first and the other was India out. And who won? India out. Mohammad Muizzu has been a minister in the past in the Maldives, and during that stint, he signed multiple deals with China. One of these deals was worth $200 million. It connected the capital to the main airport. He also met Chinese Communist Party officials last year. He said his party's comeback would strengthen relations between China and the Maldives. Does that mean he will abandon India? I guess as much as he can, he will try. New Delhi has given $3 billion to the Maldives. That's loans plus aid. There are schools being built, bridges, stadiums, hospitals, all kinds of projects. So divorcing India is not an option. The footprint is simply too big. But here's what Muizzu and company can do. Make China's footprint bigger. Beijing wants a free trade agreement with the Maldives. Soli had refused to play ball. His successor may not. Same with Chinese investments. Soli preferred Indian companies and military equipment. Chances are his successor will not. So there is no point in denying the reality. This is a strategic setback for India. But is it also the end of the road? Well, that's too early to say. What happens next depends on a number of factors. For instance, is Mohammad Muizzu his own man, or will he be controlled by Abdullah Yameen? And the early signs are not good. After winning the election, Muizzu spoke to Ibrahim Soli and he got Yameen released from jail. He's now under arrest. This is a big worry for New Delhi. Because for Yameen, taking on India is not just about policy. It somehow seems personal. There's another factor the other factor rather here is India's attitude. Do we pull back from the Maldives, or do we keep engaging irrespective of Muizu's attitude? Prime Minister Modi's message on Sunday was a positive sign. There was no hesitation or delay. Like I said, he was one of the first to congratulate Muizu, and the key is to build on that. No, there won't be the same enthusiasm from the other side. Yes, the new president will be closer to China, but not engaging could make things worse. It would give Beijing a free pass. So India needs to dig deep. India needs to pull out cards that China cannot, like historical relations, the cultural exchange, the people-to-people relations. All of this could give India a fighting chance. Also, this election is a lesson for Indian policymakers. Do not take neighbors for granted. You can't bank on just one political party. You need multi-partisan support. If not, this is the risk. And these are very important relationships for India. As the government says, it's neighborhood first. But for that, you need broad support from ordinary people, from the opposition, and of course, the ruling party. Clearly, India does not have that in the Maldives. The new President Muizu takes charge only in November, but his actions until then should give us an idea about India's future in Mali. Whether it's back a few steps or back to square one. So the Maldives is getting a new president, and India will have to work harder to keep its clout. Same with Afghanistan. India is trying hard to secure its good work there. In 2021, the democratic government in Kabul was toppled, a terrorist regime took power, and New Delhi has been trying to adapt since then. How to deal with the terrorists posing as the government? The world has not figured that out yet. And in India's case, there have been some clear points of friction, like the Afghan embassy in New Delhi. It has been shut down now. Yesterday was the mission's final day of operation. The embassy is now closed. For months, its staff had been struggling. Their numbers had reduced considerably. The ambassador left 3 months back. He has not returned yet. His name is Farid Mamunze. He was appointed by the government of Ashraf Ghani. Last year, the mission saw a power struggle. The Taliban tried to take charge. They appointed a chargé d'affaires, an official called Qadir Shah. He was already working in the embassy. Shah was a trade counselor. The Taliban promoted him. In April this year, Shah wrote a letter. It was addressed to India's External Affairs Ministry. And in this letter, Shah declared that he was now in charge. This was seen as an attempt at power grab. Ambassador Mamunze and his team pushed back. They blocked Shah from taking over. But in the months since, many of these people have left. Like I said, the ambassador has not shown up. So who else was left here? Reports say at least 4 senior officials. Also a personal secretary. We don't know where they are now, but they stopped coming to work. And then yesterday, the mission was closed. The embassy issued a press release. They gave 3 reasons for the closure. First, the lack of support from the host government, that is India. So they're saying there was lack of support from India. Second, the mission's failure to meet expectations in serving Afghan interests. And third, the reduction in personnel and resources. The letter also takes a dig at the Taliban. This is over the operation of consulates. Apparently, the Afghan diplomats in these consulates are working for the Taliban now. Let me quote from the press release. It is our firm belief that any actions taken by these consulates are not in consonance with the objectives of a legitimate or elected government and rather serve the interests of an illegitimate regime. So there was a clear tug of war. The Taliban wants more control. After seizing Kabul, it wants to manage all diplomatic missions overseas. So far, the Taliban controls at least 14 missions. New Delhi was not one of them. Here, diplomats from the Ghani government resisted the Taliban. They held fort for as long as they could, but now they've given up. And where does India stand on the issue? India has not picked a side yet, and that too is telling. India is not shutting the door on Kabul. Earlier this year, when there was a power struggle at the mission, India chose to remain neutral. It saw the tussle as an internal matter of Afghanistan. In the month of June, New Delhi, in fact, sent a message. It said, this dispute is for the Afghan officials to settle, and they should do it amongst themselves. Well, clearly they could not. So they've shut the mission down. What happens to the building now? Its control has been transferred back to New Delhi. There are some bank accounts linked to the mission. Reports say they've all been frozen. It's called Custodial Authority. And what happens next? If this mission were to resume operations, they would need an ambassador and staff. Will the Taliban send one, an ambassador to India? More importantly, will New Delhi accept a Taliban appointee? As of now, it seems unlikely. India has not recognized the Taliban government. It is following the United Nations' lead. If the United Nations recognizes the Taliban regime, India will do the same. That is the official position. But that does not stop India from engaging with them. Last week, Russia hosted a meeting. It happened in Kazan. This meeting was about Afghanistan. It's what they call the Moscow format. It's one of the key forums for engagements with the Taliban. India joined these consultations last year as well, and this year too, India sent its representatives. Also in attendance was the Taliban's acting foreign minister, plus officials from countries like China, Pakistan, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, Turkey, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. So regional players. And what did they discuss? The need for an inclusive government in Afghanistan, regional security, counter-terrorism, anti-drug efforts, all of this was discussed. And the Taliban falls short on all of these fronts, as I'm sure you already know. It shelters terror groups. It provides them with arms. It mistreats women. They cannot go to school or run a business. And when they push back, they face a crackdown. The Taliban did launch a war on drugs, but the results have been patchy. And the shutting down of diplomatic missions does not help their image. If the Taliban are looking for recognition, they're not helping their cause. Our next story comes from Canada. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau continues to make headlines, and for all the wrong reasons. 2 weeks ago, he accused India of murder. Diplomatic relations hit an all-time low. India has been asking him to crack down on Khalistani terrorism, but Trudeau justifies terror as freedom of expression. Guess what he's being accused of now? Stifling freedom of speech. That's the charge against Justin Trudeau, that he's crushing free speech. Elon Musk is the latest to say this. And the trigger is a new law in Canada. It targets podcasts. It says all online streaming services that offer podcasts must formally register with the government. Why? To maintain what it calls regulatory controls. This has led to a debate, and Musk has called Trudeau's actions shameful. Here's a report.
Canada. It's often hailed as the land of maple syrup, hockey, and politeness. But it now finds itself entangled in a curious identity crisis. Long celebrated as a bastion of freedom, Ottawa is facing accusations of stifling free speech. The accusations come from no other than Elon Musk, the owner of X, and so-called flag bearer of free speech. Musk is slamming Ottawa's new streaming laws. It says that any streaming service offering podcasts must register with the government. According to Ottawa, it's for regulatory controls. So what are these changes about? It was announced by the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunication Commission. This is an independent organization. It regulates and supervises Canada's broadcasting system. Now, the CRTC wants to modernize Canada's broadcasting framework. It wants to ensure that online streaming services make meaningful contributions to both Canadian and Indigenous content. There are 3 major changes that they want. The first is conditions for streaming services to operate in Canada. This one's already in motion. Streaming platforms operating within Canada and raising $10 million annually must now register their operations. The deadline for this registration is November 28th. It also includes streaming services that offer podcasts. The second change is providing information. All streaming services must provide details about their activity, like content and the number of subscribers. The third is supporting Canadian and Indigenous content. Consultations are still underway on that. So what's Canada's grand plan to revolutionize its streaming world? Some might argue that it's a good thing. After all, who doesn't want to protect the vulnerable or maintain balance and social harmony? But not everyone is happy about these rules. Experts have cast a doubt on these regulations. They're questioning why the government wants to regulate streaming services. Plus, there are doubts over the CRTC. The country's broadcasting regulator has been given a lot of new power that many are not sure it is worthy of. They're asking if the body even fully understands how the internet operates, and that it's a serious threat to freedom of expression, a same issue that Elon Musk is now talking about on X. So Trudeau's government has been accused of stifling free speech. But what is the Prime Minister doing? Justin Trudeau is instead accusing India of murder and talking about freedom of expression. Sounds ironic, right? This is a man who's long justified Khalistani terror as freedom of expression. But when it comes to free speech in his country, there are regulations and loopholes. This is a country where apologies flow like the Niagara Falls. But when it comes to regulating, Canada isn't apologizing yet. Sorry is sometimes the hardest word, even for Canada. Prime Minister Trudeau may have projected himself as the flag bearer of free speech. And while the road to censorship may be paved with good intentions, it's often a slippery slope. You never know when you go from regulating to suppressing.
Meanwhile, the US has completed its periodic political circus, the shutdown saga. Every time it's the same story. The president asks for money, the opposition says not so easily. They run down the clock with pointless negotiations. The US media runs doomsday headlines, and then days before the deadline, a deal is struck. This time was no different. The Democrats and Republicans have struck a deal. Additional funding has been approved until mid-November. After that, more of this drama. But the latest funding bill has one casualty, and that is Ukraine. Their aid has been frozen. Apparently, that was the bargaining chip. Republicans said, keep Ukraine out and we will approve the deal. So no more aid, at least for the next 45 days. Biden had asked the US Congress for $24 billion. He's gotten zero. What does this mean for Ukraine's war effort? It's a massive setback. So far, the US has given weapons worth $46 billion to Ukraine. It's by far the largest donor. Germany is second with $18 billion. So US support is key to Ukraine's defense. If the US leaves, chances are Ukraine will fall, and Joe Biden knows this.
I hope my friends on the other side keep their word about support for Ukraine. They said they're going to support Ukraine in a separate vote. We cannot, under any circumstance, allow American support for Ukraine to be interrupted.
So why are American lawmakers opposed to arming Ukraine? They had no problems until now. They were talking about teaching Putin a lesson. So why the hesitation now? Because of three reasons. One is corruption in Ukraine. It's a huge worry for US officials. Apparently, the money is not reaching the right places, and Zelensky realizes this. Last month, he fired his defense minister. Last week, he fired 6 military deputies. Reason? None given. The second reason is lack of results. American lawmakers were expecting lightning-fast breakthroughs. Instead, they got a slow counteroffensive. So the idea of more money is not that appealing. And finally, reason number 3, isolationism, the policy of staying out of war. It's been a feature of US policy in the past. You may remember this. The Americans had stayed out of both the world wars. They joined much later, only when their interests were threatened. Today, that sentiment is re-emerging, and leading it is Donald Trump.
Before I even arrive at the Oval Office, shortly after I win the presidency, I will have the horrible war between Russia and Ukraine settled. It'll be settled very quickly. And I will keep you out of that war, and I'll do it through strength, not through weakness, not like they did with Afghanistan. Weak.
And guess what? Americans agree. Let me tell you what a poll found in August. 55% of American voters said Congress should not give more aid to Ukraine. 55% said that. 51% said the US had done enough. So war fatigue is real, and America is feeling it. So are people in Slovakia, by the way. They voted for a new populist prime minister, this man, Robert Fico. He was a pro-Russia candidate. During the campaign, he promised to end all aid to Ukraine. Does he stick by that promise? Listen in.
Our stance on Ukraine is precisely formulated. Our positions remain unchanged when it comes to our statements before the parliamentary elections. I want to remind you that Slovakia has different problems than Ukraine.
That settles it. Slovakia is among the top 5 European backers of Ukraine. They have given MiG fighter jets, infantry vehicles and anti-aircraft systems, but chances are no more. Robert Fico has been asked to form a government. Unless there is some last-minute miracle, he will stop aid to Ukraine. And how has Russia reacted to this? Well, Moscow says we saw it coming.
We have already said this a number of times, that according to our forecasts, fatigue from this conflict, fatigue from the absurd sponsorship of the Kyiv regime, will increase in various countries, including the United States. And this fatigue will lead to a fragmentation of the political establishment and a rise in infighting.
What happens now? Ukraine cannot sustain the war by themselves. They need alternatives. They need other allies to step up. The European Union is trying to do that. Their foreign ministers are meeting in Kiev. It's a first in the bloc's history. Until now, all EU meetings have been held in EU countries. But Ukraine is not a member yet. It is not a member of the European Union. So this meeting is supposed to be a message of support from Europe. Sort of like saying that we've got you.
Ukraine's future lies in the European Union, in our community of freedom, and it will soon stretch from Lisbon to Luhansk. With every village, with every meter that Ukraine liberates, with every meter where it saves its people, it also paves its way into the European Union.
Great statements, but can the EU walk the talk? The US military aid is worth $46 billion. If you add non-military aid, it's worth $75 billion. Can Europe raise that kind of money? Do they have the political will to raise it? Putin was counting on Western indifference when he invaded Ukraine. At first, he was proven wrong. The war rejuvenated the Western alliance, but more than 580 days later, his bet is paying off. Hollywood star Tom Hanks has issued a warning. He can be seen on social media selling a dental plan, except it's not him. It's an AI version of him, artificial intelligence. He says he has nothing to do with this plan. Another Hollywood star is talking years after his death. Robin Williams' voice has been recreated. His daughter says it's disturbing and horrendous. And these are just two examples, two high-profile examples. They show what artificial intelligence can do. And celebrities are worried. Their art, their privacy, and their credibility is on the line. AI deepfakes are becoming more sophisticated and, in some cases, more dangerous. Our next report explains.
This is Tom Hanks. He's a legendary American actor. Castaway, Forrest Gump, Saving Private Ryan. None of these movies would have been as good without Hanks. Many have appreciated his brilliant acting over the years. And now, it turns out, so has artificial intelligence. AI has learned from Hanks and his mastery of the craft, and using that knowledge, AI has churned out its own masterpiece. Well, maybe not a masterpiece, but a lucrative offering nonetheless.
From strikes to creating digital versions of actors, this is a dystopian future you won't want to miss.
AI has created a dental plan ad featuring Tom Hanks. Yes, Hanks wants you to cast away your cavities, arrest the bleeding in your gums, and save your pointy canines. Despite the pun possibilities, Hanks was left sleepless when he found out. He decided to catch the ad while he could, and before it sullied his name. He put up this terminal warning. It says he had nothing to do with the dental ad. AI was the captain now. But how did this happen? What road led to this perdition? Well, it's been coming for years, but the AI revolution truly began about a year ago, when ChatGPT was released to the public. The AI chatbot was a shot in the arm for deepfake technology, because it uses generative artificial intelligence. Generative AI is trained on millions upon millions of bytes of information. It learns from someone's earlier work, so it can imitate them. If there's enough data available, AI can create a digital clone, which is what happened to Hanks. And he's not alone. There are numerous examples. But another recent one is especially upsetting: the late Robin Williams. The gifted comedian Williams died about a decade ago, and now AI has studied his voice and recreated it. It's jarring for the close ones he's left behind. his daughter Zelda has slammed the AI deepfake. She compared AI generations to Frankenstein's monster. Think about people like Tom Hanks. Their craft involves their appearance, voice, and personality, and they charge a premium for it. But what happens when AI can create a digital clone of an actor? Dental ads are the tip of the iceberg. The digital clones could start replacing them in movies and TV shows. Without their consent, their likeness could be made to say or do anything. This is even worse for dead artists. Robin Williams is no more, but his voice can be made to say anything, and he isn't around to sue or fight it in any way. His daughter Zelda is fighting on his behalf, but that's not going to be the case for everyone. AI deepfakes pose an ethical and moral dilemma, and they can impact earnings. You can see why artists are scared of it. That's one of the reasons Hollywood writers and actors have been on strike for months. They want guardrails on the use of AI in Hollywood. The writers have managed to put some rules in place, and they're understandably relieved.
The AI protections. Because I think everyone knew, I think we all kind of knew how in the present, how a studio could exploit AI. And the fact that the protections against it was so broad and so ironclad, it was a sigh of relief. And I was giddy, basically.
The Hollywood actors' strike could end soon too, with similar protections. But that's just from the Hollywood studios. Who will protect them from companies looking to sell dental care? AI needs far more rules and laws governing it. And for that, all the world's governments need to step in. Because it won't be long till AI deepfakes reach a league of their own.
We've talked about economic slowdown, we've talked about wars. Both inflict pain. But do you know what can be worse? A pandemic. Our generation has seen it firsthand. The Wuhan virus pandemic. The whole world was hit. More than 770 million people were infected, 6.9 million of them died. It was horrible. Turns out it was just a trailer. The next one will be much worse, and it is coming. I know it sounds ominous, but I'm not the one saying this. Experts are. They say the next big pandemic is coming. It will be caused by what they call Disease X. And no, Elon Musk has nothing to do with this. The name Disease X was adopted by the World Health Organization back in 2018. The name is hypothetical. It stands for a disease caused by an unknown microbe, like the variable X. It could be anything. A flu, the Wuhan virus, or a souped-up ancient killer making a comeback like typhoid or tuberculosis. It could spill over from one species to another, go to humans from a pig, a bat, a chicken, or even a hamster. It could come out of a fur farm in the UK or a pig farm in Mexico. It could be birthed in a disturbed forest or a weapons lab in Algeria. It may arrive decades later or tomorrow. And that's some high-stakes confusion. Every few weeks, they come up with a new report on this disease X. It makes dire predictions. But honestly, it offers nothing concrete. It's infuriating. If they don't know anything for sure, why bother at all? All they can say with some certainty is this: another pandemic is inevitable. With worsening climate change and denser human and animal populations, Disease X is coming. Many experts have said this. The latest one is Dame Kate Bingham. She chaired the UK's vaccine task force. She says the next pandemic could be 20 times deadlier than the one caused by Wuhan virus. It could take 50 million lives. Now, reports say scientists have identified 25 virus families so far. 25 families, each family has thousands of viruses within it. But there are still millions of others yet to be discovered. So fear of the unknown persists. Do you know what makes it worse? The lack of clarity over pandemic response. What do you do when it hits us? No one knows how to deal with the next outbreak. It's been 3 years since the Wuhan virus pandemic began, yet many aspects of the best response remain unsettled. When a new virus spreads quickly, with no warning, there is little information. But at that time, hard policy decisions have to be made, and they must be made quickly. There are many questions. Should schools be closed? Should there be a mask mandate? Should there be international travel bans? If a safe and effective vaccine becomes available, should it be mandated? Should it be compulsory? Health experts and policymakers have debated these questions, but they have not reached a conclusion. There is no collective response or resolve to devise a plan. About 2 years ago, countries agreed to develop what they called a pandemic treaty, like a global agreement. A treaty that would list the ideal response to future diseases to help with preparation and prevention. That was the plan. But 2 years and counting, there is no such treaty. This year, the United Nations became desperate. At the General Assembly, they took matters in their own hands. The UN called for a high-level pandemic meeting. It was held in September, and a document was released. Guess what it said? Any obligations stated for the governments became recommendations. Do you know who was given the lion's share of responsibility here? The World Health Organization, the one that dragged its feet and praised China in the last pandemic. They are in charge again. And all of this offers little hope. It shows that pandemic amnesia has set in. The sense of urgency has been replaced by complacency. Public health systems were exposed the last time. They were unprepared. They could not cope. And policymakers are showing no intent to fix this. With no plan in place, they will scramble to solve the next crisis. They'll be caught unprepared yet again. Disease X may be fictitious today, but it's also a harsh warning. The world cannot wing a pandemic. It must prepare for one. Now let's talk about New York City. The Big Apple saw some of its worst floods ever on Friday. Streets were submerged, subways became rivers, and Central Park turned into a giant swamp. New York saw a month's worth of rainfall in just one day. It was under 8 inches of water on average. The city that never sleeps was brought to its knees. Now, for those of us from tropical countries, this may not seem like much. After all, rain and flooding are a part of life here. But New York is far up the north. It's supposed to have a temperate climate. These storms are supposed to be once-in-a-century occurrences in cities like New York, but climate change means they're becoming more and more frequent. Here's our report.
Waterfalls in the subway, floating mounds of trash in the streets, cars taking on the role of boats. This was New York City on Friday. Early in the day, the heavens parted and drowned New York in a month's worth of rainfall.
I've been living here all my life and I never ever saw this ever.
The cloudburst stopped the city. An emergency was declared.
I am issuing a state of an emergency for New York City based on the weather conditions. And I want to say to all New Yorkers, this is time for heightened alertness and extreme caution. If you are home, stay home. If you are at work or school, shelter in place for now. Some of our subways are flooded and it's extremely difficult to move around the city.
The rains wreaked havoc on New York's public transport system, and the city's lifeline, its crumbling subway system, was the worst hit. The tube ceilings did nothing to keep the water out. About 4 million daily commuters were inconvenienced, and this persisted even after the rain stopped.
Well, you know, this is the first I've been back to New York in years and years and years. I got here about 7:45 in the morning, and I ended up walking in the rain for hours because the trains weren't running because of flooding.
This isn't supposed to happen in a city as far up north as New York. These are tropical storm conditions, but it's become a far too frequent occurrence. A storm like the one on Friday is supposed to be a once-in-a-century event, but to New Yorkers, it seemed all too familiar. They're coming to terms with their situation.
This was the kind of rain that was once unimaginable. We called them once-in-a-century storms. But this is the third time since I was sworn in 2 years ago I've had a once-in-a-century storm.
Climate change is the cause for these tropical storms so far north. But that's just one of the reasons why New York is suffering so much. What makes it worse is that the city is sinking. A new study was just released last week by NASA scientists. It says the city is sinking by about 1.6 millimeters per year. They say it's the length a toenail grows in a month. Imagine an entire city sinking that much year on year. Why is this happening? It's simple, really. The city is too heavy. This is New York, after all, a city of skyscrapers. Those giant towers in the sky have a direct impact on the ground. The weight of their frames pushes the earth downwards. And it's not just the skyscrapers, it's heavy construction in general. A new study on sinking mentions two hotspots, the LaGuardia Airport and the Arthur Ashe Stadium. Both places see thousands of people on a regular basis. The weight of all those feet adds up, which is also a problem with New York overall. The Big Apple is a big draw. Everyone wants to go there, or so it seems, and their cumulative weight is bringing the city down. The lower a city sinks, the more water will accumulate there. That's Physics 101. Water goes from high ground to low ground. Soon, even smaller storms will leave New York inundated in the future. But despite all this being common knowledge, New York isn't doing much. Other parts of the world are sinking too. A prominent example is Venice. But the Venetian authorities are working to mitigate that. They are adding buoys to help keep their city afloat. It's a simple solution and one that could be applied to New York as well. Is the Big Apple looking into it? Or any other solutions for that matter? If not, it seems the future looks bleak for the city that never sleeps.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Las Vegas has a new attraction billed as the future of entertainment. The world's largest spherical structure offers a new, never-seen-before concert experience, apparently. In Jerusalem, thousands of Jewish worshippers gathered at the Western Wall for prayer. And a drone video shows one shark chasing hundreds of stingrays off the coast of Florida. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1869, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was born in India's Gujarat. Also known as Mahatma, Gandhi played a pivotal role in India's independence. He is known as the father of the nation. He shares his birthday with Lal Bahadur Shastri, who was born on the 2nd of October in Uttar Pradesh. He went on to become the Prime Minister of India. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
It's the dream of every cricketer, the ultimate glory. Few manage to keep their date with destiny. But for many, it's been heartbreaks and a cross to bear. The Holy Grail is here in India. I'm Rupa Ramani, and Firstpost brings you the ringside view. We bring you the Cup of Dreams, Cricket World Cup coverage like never before.